The wind outside the co-op grain elevator did not just blow, it screamed across the flat, frozen expanse of Ovid, North Dakota, carrying the kind of dry, bitter cold that turned diesel fuel to sludge and bones to brittle glass. Inside the cavernous loading bay, the air smelled of scorched ozone and the sweat of 6 third-generation farmers who had run out of ideas 20 minutes ago. The ancient lift line had jammed mid-cycle, trapping 50,000 bushels of the county's final harvest in the upper chutes. If the pneumatic lines burst, half the families in the valley wouldn't recover before spring. Miller, the co-op manager, kicked a rusted steel housing and turned his fury toward the quietest corner of the room. "Don't just stand there, Clara." His voice bounced off the corrugated walls. "Your daddy was too drunk to show up. We don't need you getting in the way before that hoist drops." Clara didn't move. At 16, her posture was so rigidly upright it looked architectural, her right hand buried deep in the pocket of an oversized canvas coat. Jed, an older farmer with frost in his beard, didn't even look at her when he spoke. "Leave her, Miller. She hasn't been right since the barn." He spat on the frozen concrete. "She's just standing there." Beneath her coat, her right shoulder was on fire. The November cold did that, turned the nerve damage into something that felt like electricity running the wrong direction through a wire. She bit the inside of her cheek, tasted copper, and kept her face still. A wince would cost her more than the pain itself. She had known that long before the barn, long before the tractor, long before any of it. Some things you are born understanding. Some things you learn by watching someone else refuse to break and recognizing the refusal as your own. She picked up an iron wrench with her left hand, stepped into the circle of men without a word, and studied the shaking pressure housing for 3 seconds. Then she slammed the wrench into the auxiliary bypass lever and threw her full weight behind it. The pressure released with a sound like a cannon. A hairline fracture in the valve casing sent a jet of black hydraulic fluid directly into her face, her eyes, her hair, the collar of her coat. The engine smoothed out instantly. Above them, the conveyor belts began to move. The men didn't speak. They watched her raise her left sleeve and wipe the oil from her eyes in one slow, unhurried motion. Her expression didn't change. She set the wrench down on the housing, turned, and walked through the heavy draft curtains and out into the blizzard. She didn't look back. The wrench lay at Miller's feet. The belts hummed overhead. 50,000 bushels moved toward morning. 6 months earlier, the gymnasium smelled of floor wax and concession popcorn. Clara was breaking down folding tables after the spring fundraiser, wedging each steel frame against her hip, dragging it one-handed to the storage rack. Her right arm hung at her side. She had nearly finished when Linda Marsh appeared, not a teenager, but a woman in her 40s who organized the church rummage sales and always brought a casserole when someone died. Linda had kind eyes and a voice calibrated to carry across a room without appearing to try. "Clara, honey, you really don't have to do that." She said it loudly enough that the cluster of parents nearby could hear, her hand already reaching. "Nobody expects you to manage all this. Just leave it. That's what the rest of us are here for." From somewhere behind her, Trent Hadley laughed, 17, broad-shouldered, the kind of boy the town would spend the next decade calling promising. "She's not going to leave it, Mrs. Marsh. She'll stand there and glare at you all night before she asks for help." Clara tightened her left hand around the steel frame, hoisted the table, and slid it cleanly into the rack. She walked past both of them without breaking stride. The gym went quiet in the particular way it does when everyone present knows something cruel just happened and no one intends to acknowledge it. What infuriated them was not the injury. It was her refusal to perform it. They wanted the limp visible, the wincing public, the helplessness confirmed and on display so the natural order of things could be maintained. A broken girl who acted broken was a tragedy they could manage. A broken girl who didn't was something that made them feel accused of something they couldn't name. She pushed through the gymnasium side door into the warm spring evening and stood alone in the parking lot. The pain in her shoulder had climbed to a place behind her right eye. She pressed her left thumb against the bridge of her nose, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, and waited for it to pass. She had always been good at waiting. At being still inside a thing that was trying to move her. She had learned that, if she had learned it anywhere, from watching her grandmother cross a hardware store parking lot on a February morning when Clara was 8 years old, the way Maeve walked with her hip obviously wrong, obviously grinding, obviously costing her something significant with every step, and the way she walked anyway, at the same pace she always walked, her chin level, her face arranged into something that was not a performance of ease but simply the complete and private ownership of her own pain. A man outside the feed store had called out to ask if she needed a hand, and Maeve had glanced at him the way you glance at a weather vane, noting the information, not particularly moved by it, and said no thank you and kept walking. Clara had been sitting in the cold truck watching, and she had felt something locate itself inside her chest like a compass finding north. She hadn't had words for it then. She didn't need them. A year before the gymnasium, in her father's garage, the air had tasted of motor oil and stale beer. Clara was 15. She was the better mechanic of the two of them, and they both knew it, though neither had ever said so out loud because saying it would have required them to also say why, that Frank's hands shook on bad mornings, that his measurements had grown imprecise, that he sometimes stood in front of an open engine bay for a long moment as though he had forgotten what language it spoke. Reach under the housing, Frank said, his wrench slipping on a stubborn bolt. Hold the lock pin while I clear the secondary line. Hurry up. She slid her right arm into the machine and gripped the cold iron pin. She trusted the jack. She trusted him. Those were the same thing, and she had never thought to question either. The seal ruptured with a wet pop. The iron arm dropped. The pain was a whiteout, total, instantaneous, the kind that doesn't build but simply arrives all at once like a door slamming open in a dark room. It erased sound, erased the smell of oil, erased the yellow garage light above her. There was only the weight and the concrete and the white. Frank got the jack under it within seconds and pumped it free, but those seconds had their own duration, their own interior geography, and she had time inside them to understand that something had changed permanently and that the only question was what she intended to do about it. He was sobbing before she was fully clear of the machine, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handle, his voice breaking in a register she had never heard from him. Talk to me. Scream. Do something. He was on his knees in the grease beside her, his face unrecognizable, the face of a man watching himself do the thing he would spend the rest of his life trying to undo. Don't look at me like that. Oh God, I broke you, Clara, I broke my girl. Her hand was destroyed. Her shoulder had separated in a way she could feel as a wrongness rather than simply a pain, something geometrically incorrect about the world. She had enough air in her lungs to scream. She was aware of this the way you are aware of a tool on a workbench, present, available, a choice. She kept her eyes on his. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, slowly and deliberately, until he began to match her without realizing he was doing it. His sobbing slowed. His shaking hands found her face and held it. She held his gaze and did not look away and did not give him the sound of what was happening inside her body because the sound of it would have cracked him entirely, and she was 15 years old with a shattered hand and she was the one keeping them both from going under, and she did not find this strange or unfair. It was simply what the moment required, and she was built for what moments required. She had always been built for it. The barn hadn't made her this way. The barn had only proven it. For years before the barn, she was 11 years old and her body was whole, and the world was an August evening with the heat still in it and her grandmother sitting on the back porch of the farmhouse shelling butter beans into a metal bowl. Maeve was 77. She had farmed this ground for 50 years, buried a husband in it, kept it through 2 droughts and a foreclosure and the slow particular ruin of a son who couldn't stop drinking. Her hip had been wrong for a decade. She had never had it looked at properly because there was always something more pressing and because she was not, at her core, a woman who organized her life around what hurt. She sat in the wooden chair with the bowl between her knees and her hands moving through the beans with the automatic precision of someone who has done a thing so many times it has become a form of rest, and the only evidence that the hip was costing her anything at all was a very slight tightening at the corner of her left eye that appeared and disappeared so quickly you would miss it if you weren't watching closely. Clara was watching closely. She was always watching closely. It was the thing she did best and the thing people noticed least about her. A truck pulled into the gravel drive. It was Roy Edmonds, 60, who farmed the adjacent section and had opinions about everything and delivered them all at full volume. He climbed out and leaned on the fence post and looked at Maeve with the particular expression of a man who mistakes observation for generosity. "Maeve, I gotta say, you're looking rough. That hip giving you trouble again? Dorothy said she saw you limping at the co-op last Tuesday. Said it looked bad." He shook his head slowly. "You really ought to see somebody about that. Let somebody help you for once in your life." Maeve's hands didn't stop moving through the beans. She looked up at Roy with an expression that was not unkind and not warm and not anything that invited further comment. She looked at him the way the horizon looks at weather, present, level, entirely unmoved. "I appreciate your concern, Roy," she said, and went back to the beans. Roy stood at the fence post for a moment in the particular discomfort of a man who expected more and received less. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. Maeve's hands kept moving. The beans clicked against the bottom of the metal bowl in a slow, steady rhythm. The evening light went gold across the fields. Her left eye didn't tighten again. Clara sat on the porch step and watched all of this and said nothing. She was 11 and she had no philosophy and no framework and no words for what she was seeing. She only knew that something in her chest had gone very quiet and very certain, the way it goes when you recognize something you didn't know you'd been looking for. She watched her grandmother's hands move through the beans and she watched the fields go gold and she understood, in the wordless way that children sometimes understand the most important things, that pain was not the same as damage. That the hip and the grief and the decades of hard years had not taken anything essential from Maeve. That Maeve was still entirely, completely, unbreachably herself, and that Roy Edmonds and his concern and his truck and his opinions had moved through her grandmother's life like wind moves through a fence, passing through the gaps, touching nothing structural, gone before it arrived. She filed it away. She didn't know yet what she was filing it for. Back in the blizzard, Clara's boots found their rhythm in the snow. The elevator's machinery hummed steadily behind her, doing what it was built to do. The hydraulic oil on her face had begun to freeze at the edges, pulling slightly at her skin with each step. She didn't hurry. She moved through the white dark the way she moved through everything, at her own pace, at her own temperature, accountable to nothing but the ground beneath her feet and the direction she had chosen. The shoulder burned. It would burn all night, she knew, and into tomorrow, and she would manage it the way she always managed it, not by diminishing it or denying it but by simply refusing to let it determine anything. The pain was on her side of the wall. Everything else was on the other side. That was the whole arrangement and it had never failed her. She thought of her grandmother's hands moving through the beans in the golden evening light. She thought of her father's face in the garage and the choice she had made on the concrete floor. She thought of the gymnasium and the parking lot and the long practice of standing inside hard things without being moved by them. The town of Ovid thought it understood what had happened to Clara Vane in her father's barn. They thought the silence came from there, from that specific iron weight on that specific concrete floor, and they were almost forgivable for thinking so because they were people who believed that breaking was something that happened to you from the outside. They had never considered that some people are not built to break. That some people arrive in the world already carrying something denser than bone, something that the hardest years don't fracture but only compress further, and that what looks from the outside like damage is in fact just the shape that density takes under pressure. Clara walked into the dark and the cold closed behind her, and the town of Ovid was left with the hum of the machinery and the wrench on the floor and the slowly dawning understanding that the girl they had spent a year pitying had just saved every one of them without making a sound. She didn't need them to understand it. She didn't need them to understand anything. She already had everything she needed. She had always had everything she needed. She walked on. If this story stayed with you, if you recognized something in Clara, in the silence, in the cost of carrying things no one else can see, then you already know there are people around you right now doing exactly what she did. Holding the weight. Keeping the face still. Building with the pain instead of drowning in it. We tell stories like this one because they deserve to be told. If you think someone else needs to hear this one, send it to them. And if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. We'll be back.